Hey, dummy! Two words that made the world laugh, yet hid the story of the man who spoke them. On January 30, 2026, Demond Wilson died at 79, remembered forever as Lamont Sanford, the patient, enduring son of Sanford and Son. But behind the straight man's calm reactions was a life of complexity and courage. A child performer who danced at the Apollo, a soldier wounded in Vietnam, a father, a minister, and a man trapped by a role that Hollywood loved more than him. Tonight, we go beyond the punchlines to uncover the man behind the character, the struggles, the triumphs, and the resilience of Demond Wilson, a story of a life far richer than any sitcom could ever capture. From Valdosta to Vietnam, Grady Demond Wilson was born on October 13, 1946, in Valdosta, Georgia, a small city in the southern part of the state, close to the Florida line. His family relocated to New York while he was still young, and he grew up in Harlem, in the middle of one of the most culturally electric neighborhoods in American history. The Harlem of Wilson's childhood was a place where art was not a luxury, but an infrastructure. Jazz clubs, dance halls, churches, and theaters formed the architecture of daily life, and talent was identified early, cultivated communally, and put to work. Wilson was put to work at 4 years old. In 1950, he made his Broadway debut in a revival of The Green Pastures, the Pulitzer Prize-winning play by Mark Connelly, performing alongside William Marshall and Ossie Davis. 4 years old, on a Broadway stage, in a production that featured two of the most respected black actors of the 20th century. The experience did not make him famous, so it made him a professional. By the time he was 12, he was dancing at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, the venue that served as the unofficial proving ground for black performers across every discipline. He studied tap and ballet. He trained at the American Community Theater and later took classes at Hunter College. The path seemed clear. Performance was not a dream for Wilson. It was a trade he had been practicing since before he could read. Then, the path broke. Wilson was drafted into the United States Army in 1966. He was assigned to the 4th Infantry Division and sent to Vietnam, where he served a combat tour and was wounded. The details of his service have never been extensively documented in public interviews. Wilson did not trade on his military record. He did not make it part of his brand. But the experience marked him in ways that would surface later. In the discipline of his work ethic, in his impatience with triviality, and in the spiritual reckoning that would eventually reshape his entire life. He returned from Vietnam and went back to performing. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, he began picking up screen work. He made an uncredited appearance in the Ossie Davis-directed film Cotton Comes to Harlem in 1970. In 1971, he appeared alongside Sidney Poitier in the crime thriller The Organization. He landed guest spots on Mission, Impossible, and Rowan, and Martin's Laugh-In. The roles were small, but they established him as a working actor with range, a man who could handle drama and comedy, who moved well on camera, and who had the kind of quiet, grounded screen presence that directors noticed even when audiences did not. And the role that changed everything was a guest appearance on All in the Family in 1971, in an episode titled Edith Writes a Song. Wilson and actor Cleavon Little played two burglars from Harlem who hold the Bunker family hostage in their home. The episode was a showcase for both men, a taut comedy of confrontation between Norman Lear's white working-class bigots and two black characters who refused to be reduced to stereotypes. Wilson was sharp, funny, and physically commanding, and Norman Lear, who produced the show, noticed. A few months later, Lear and his producing partner Bud Yorkin were developing a new series for NBC based on the popular British sitcom Steptoe and Son, about a father and son running a junk business. The American adaptation would be set in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles. The father would be played by Redd Foxx, the legendary stand-up comic who had spent decades as one of the most popular and most profane performers on the black nightclub circuit. For the son, Lear needed someone who could hold the screen against Foxx without trying to compete with him. Someone with timing, patience, and the physical charisma to anchor the show's emotional center while Foxx detonated comedy around him. Wilson later told the Associated Press that he won the role over Richard Pryor. Johnny Brown had also been considered, but was committed to Laugh-In. Wilson was 25 years old. He had never led a television series. He had reservations about the project. As he later wrote, after learning about the series format, he was doubtful about his involvement and thought about it long and hard before deciding to take a chance. That chance would make him one of the most watched performers in America. It would also define, and in many ways confine, the rest of his career. The Sanford and Son era Sanford and Son premiered on NBC on January 14, 1972, produced by Norman Lear and Bud Yorkin, the same team behind All in the Family. Where Lear's earlier show confronted the discomfort of a white bigot facing a changing America, Sanford and Son planted itself firmly within a black world, letting that world speak for itself. Fred Sanford, played by Redd Foxx, was a widowed junk dealer operating Sanford and Son Salvage at 9114 South Central Avenue in Watts. Cantankerous, scheming, occasionally bigoted, and addicted to get-rich-quick plots that never worked, Fred was the force of chaos. Lamont, played by Demond Wilson, was his son and reluctant business partner, a young man who despised the junkyard yet stayed out of loyalty and obligation. That tension, wanting to leave but unable to go, was the engine of the show. Every episode followed a familiar rhythm. Fred schemed. Lamont objected. Fred faked a heart attack, clutching his chest and calling out to his deceased wife, Elizabeth, a gag that became one of television's most iconic running jokes. Lamont would relent. The junkyard would endure. Beneath the laughter, the show offered something unprecedented. A working-class black father and son navigating poverty, ambition, and generational conflict with humor, stubbornness, and love. It was messy, loud, unapologetically real, and informed by Fox's decades of experience performing for black audiences. Wilson's role, while structurally undervalued, was essential. Foxx was the marquee, the reason the show existed. Lamont was the emotional anchor. Without him, Fred's antics would have been mere noise. Wilson gave audiences someone to root for, someone whose patience felt earned, whose frustration was tangible, whose loyalty elevated the show from slapstick to a portrait of family obligation. Off-screen, Wilson and Foxx were collaborators more than friends. Foxx, a veteran performer driven by instinct and ego, often dominated the set. Wilson, disciplined and professional, became increasingly aware of how the show spotlighted one performer at the expense of the other. In 1974, Foxx walked off over a salary dispute, leaving Wilson to carry the series with Whitman Mayo and the ensemble. He proved the show could survive without its star. When Foxx returned, their partnership continued until 1977. Wilson later recalled learning of Fox's departure, not from Foxx, but from a newscaster in an NBC hallway. He forgave Foxx, loved him even, but never forgot. As he put it, the love was visible on screen. Anyone could watch and see it. And when asked in 2014 if he kept in touch with anyone from the show, his answer was a single word: no. Career beyond Lamont Sanford. After Sanford and Son ended in 1977, Demond Wilson faced opportunities that looked promising on paper, but offered little in practice. CBS cast him in Baby, I'm Back, a sitcom about a father returning to his family after a long absence. It lasted just 13 episodes. In 1982, he starred opposite Ron Glass in The New Odd Couple, ABC's remake of the Jack Klugman-Tony Randall classic, with Wilson as Oscar Madison. That series lasted 18 episodes. Both shows were competently made, yet neither found an audience. This pattern was familiar to anyone who understood the television industry's treatment of black actors in the late 1970s and early 1980s. A performer could achieve massive popularity in a single role, but networks struggled or refused to see them as capable of anything beyond it. Wilson was Lamont. The roles that followed were invariably comedies, built around domestic dynamics, designed to exploit a personality the audience already associated with a specific performance. Wilson did not hide his frustration. In a 1986 interview with the Los Angeles Times, he described acting as emotionally exhausting, not because it lacked challenge, but because he was forced to simulate excitement for work beneath his abilities. A man who had performed professionally since childhood was being asked to mask disillusionment and pass it off as enthusiasm, a reflection of the system's unwillingness to cultivate black talent beyond narrow, familiar parameters. Film and guest appearances offered fleeting engagement. Full Moon High, 1981, Me and the Kid, 1993, Hammerlock, 2000, and 4 episodes of Girlfriends in the 2000s. None carried the cultural impact of Sanford and Son. None were designed to. In 2009, Wilson published Second Banana, the bittersweet memoirs of the Sanford and Son years. The title was itself an assertion of self-awareness. A second banana, the straight man, is the performer whose purpose is to make the star shine. Wilson did not resist the label. He claimed it, documenting the behind-the-scenes reality of the show with honesty and nuance. And he did not seek revenge, but he recorded tensions, salary disputes, and walkouts, acknowledging the partnership's significance. "Red and I were making history back in those days," he wrote. Wilson understood his role in television history. Sanford and Son, alongside Good Times, The Jeffersons, and What's Happening, opened doors for black-centered programming, proving audiences were large, loyal, and commercially viable. The paths he helped create led directly to The Cosby Show, A Different World, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and beyond. Yet he knew, with unflinching clarity, that the man who opens the door is not always the man who gets to walk through it. In claiming his story, Wilson ensured that his contributions and the limitations imposed upon him would not be forgotten. Faith, ministry, and the life chosen. The most important decision of Demond Wilson's life was not accepting the role of Lamont Sanford, it was leaving Hollywood behind. In the 1980s, by his own account, Wilson struggled with cocaine addiction. He sold his house in Beverly Hills. He confronted the emptiness that had grown behind the professional disappointments and the narrowing of his career. And he found his way back to a vow he had made as a 12-year-old boy in Harlem, lying in a hospital bed after his appendix ruptured and nearly killed him. At that age, Wilson had promised himself that he would one day serve God in some form of ministry. In 1984, Demond Wilson was ordained as a Pentecostal minister. He later described this transition with a simplicity that left no room for ambiguity. "I love preaching the gospel more than anything I've ever done," he said in a 1985 interview. "I'm so happy now. I feel honored to be chosen. Even when you've got everything, clothes, jewelry, nice house, you do not feel happy. I was like Jonah, running from the Lord." The comparison to Jonah is revealing. In the biblical narrative, Jonah is called by God to preach in Nineveh and runs in the opposite direction. He is swallowed by a great fish and returned to his mission. Wilson saw his own trajectory in those terms. Hollywood was the direction he had run. Ministry was where he was always meant to arrive. In 1994, he founded Restoration House of America, an organization that provided spiritual guidance and vocational training to formerly incarcerated people. It was quiet, unglamorous work. There were no cameras, no ratings, no residuals. Wilson threw himself into it with the same discipline he had brought to every stage of his career, from Broadway at 4 to Vietnam at 20 to NBC at 25. He wrote books. New Age Millennium, published in 1998, was a Christian critique of New Age philosophy and what Wilson saw as its hidden spiritual dangers. He wrote children's books. He appeared on the Trinity Broadcasting Network's Praise the Lord program multiple times, speaking about faith with the comfortable authority of a man who had tested his own convictions against real suffering and found them durable. Wilson married Cicely Louise Johnston on May 3, 1974, during the height of Sanford and Son's run. They remained married for over 50 years. Together, they had 6 children. In an industry notorious for the destruction of personal relationships, Wilson's marriage endured across decades, through fame and obscurity, through addiction and recovery, through the slow, unglamorous work of raising a family far from the spotlight. He did not disappear. He chose a different life. And the distinction matters, because Hollywood has a habit of framing an actor's departure from the industry as a failure rather than a decision. Wilson's story disrupts that framing. He was not a man who could not get work. He was a man who decided that the work being offered was not worth the cost of doing it. That is not defeat. It is discernment. Sanford and Son, Beyond the Spotlight. Demond Wilson's career, viewed from a distance, follows a pattern familiar in the history of black performance in America. A prodigiously talented individual, trained from childhood and battle-tested in the most demanding environments the culture offers, achieves massive success in a single role, and then watches an industry that celebrated that role refuse to offer anything of comparable ambition. This was not bad luck. It was structural. The sitcom boom of the 1970s brought unprecedented visibility for black actors on network television. But visibility was not power. Creative control remained in the hands of white executives and showrunners, leaving performers like Wilson to navigate opportunities that were limited, narrow, or entirely dictated by decisions made in rooms they could never enter. Wilson understood this intimately. He carried Sanford and Son through full seasons when his co-star, Red Fox, walked off set. Yet afterward, he was offered projects that were, by any honest assessment, lesser versions of what he had already accomplished. Not because of talent, but because the system lacked imagination. Fox himself operated within similar constraints. NBC tried reviving the franchise with Sanford Arms in 1977 without either Fox or Wilson. It lasted just 4 episodes. Fox returned in 1981 with Sanford, but Wilson declined to reprise Lamont, and the series lasted 1 season. Fox would die in 1991 during the filming of The Royal Family. The cause a heart attack. But the irony of his passing, reminiscent of Fred Sanford's famous fake heart attacks, underscored the blurred lines between performance and reality. The lesson of Wilson's career is systemic. American entertainment was not designed to sustain black artistic careers beyond the narrow windows it chose to open. And those windows opened briefly for Sanford and Son and a few others, then closed, leaving extraordinary performers to navigate a machine that profited from their talent without investing in their future. Wilson refused bitterness, but he also refused silence. His memoir, his interviews, and his careful documentation of what happened behind the scenes were acts of testimony, not revenge, preserving the truth of a career lived under structural constraints. The legacy of Wilson and Fox's work endures. Shows like The Cosby Show, Martin, Living Single, The Fresh Prince, and Blackish all owe a debt to the doors they forced open. Whether Hollywood has fully acknowledged that debt or learned the lessons Wilson's career offers remains an open question, one that challenges the industry to reckon with its history while honoring the artists who shaped it against the odds. As the lights of the junkyard fade and the laughter echoes into reruns, one question remains. What does it mean to truly witness a life lived on your own terms, unseen by the applause it once commanded? Lamont Wilson's story may have ended quietly, but the legacy of the man behind Lamont Sanford lingers, waiting for those willing to look beyond the punchlines. And somewhere, in the spaces between memory and myth, the real story is only just beginning.